Plenty of grass.
Yeah, this is really a.
It's beautiful.
And see, it's so much better than what we when we were going to come that last time with the storm.
Did you ever get copies of that
Yeah.
from Hunhoff at Yankton?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've got this one. This is the ones that you. Well, let's see. Did I
Oh,
get
yeah.
this from Rick? Maybe I got this from Rick. Either Rick or you, but I ran some extra copies. In fact, you guys have seen this as well. I just kind of wanted them to be a little familiar.
Just heads up, boy, ready when you are.
Okay, well, why don't we just, start out with your name and about and lead into it as far as you want to go. You said you wanted to start early history. You had a little bit of brief history you wanted to give, background. I won't ask you any questions until you decide, if you stop, then I'll sort of direct you, but you just take off and do what you want at the beginning. You do that very well. So tell them about you were the first tribal chairman at Crow Creek. Came out of World War II, 1946. You took over the reins, you held that position, and during this time was when the dam, with negotiations on the dam, and leading into how beautiful it was at that time.
You tell me when we start.
Okay.
We're ready when you are, so you can start when you have
We're ready to start?
Yep.
Go ahead.
My name is Vernon Ashley. I am probably the oldest member of the Honkbati Oyate, the Crow Creek tribe. And I am their first tribal president. And I want to begin by taking you back into history. This is before my time, but I read a lot and study. When the Pilgrims came to this continent, they came to a paradise. But they could not survive in an area where there was plenty of food, wildlife, and everything else, because I think those Pilgrims came from ghettos in Europe. So who taught them how to get along in this new world was the American Indian. Little did they know that they would lose this land to the same people. I want to tell you that at one time all of these lands belonged to the American Indian. And little did they realize that they would lose this for 1 or 2 cents an acre. I have this documentation. And but at that time, the Native American never knew the monetary system. So it sounds like we're getting a lot of money, but it wasn't that much. When you think they take millions of acres and you only get 1 or 2 cents an acre, it didn't amount to much. The other thing is the government of the United States Congress came from the American Indian. This democracy. See, when the 13 states first started this, the Indian peoples, well, each of the states had their own government. And he said in our way, when we come together, we can talk as one. And I can't remember the tribe's name, but this democracy came from the American Indian. Now, to make a long story short, we had a lot of uprisings. Historically, there's never been a president of the United States who spoke well of Indians. And you might ask the question, why? It's because they wanted the land, and they wanted the Indians out of the way. Even the reservations, they said that the Indian don't need that much land. And so what they did do, they did the Dawes Act, and the Homestead Acts. The Homestead Act took a lot of the lands away from the people. And in a sense, we were incarcerated. That's the modern terminology, and put on these reservations. And my tribe was Crow Creek was established not for any specific tribe, but for some place to move Indians. That's because of the Sioux uprising in Minnesota. The Minnesota uprising, of course, it's like it is today. You have AIM taking up action, you know. It's just a few people who did these things. And there was a lot of good Indians out there who were never involved. And stemming from that, when I think about, read these film on the Dakota conflict, my people were not treated very well. When they were incarcerated at Fort Snelling, that was under the most unsanitary conditions that you can find, because if you see the pictures, the teepees were just one right after the other. And you look at my place and look, all the space that I've got is something. But to make a long story short, my people were moved from Fort Snelling, where they were incarcerated, in barges, in a barge. Now I can't remember the name of the barge, but they were taken from Fort Snelling down to Mississippi, down to St. Louis, and from St. Louis up the Missouri to Crow Creek. And if you go from Fort Thompson to Chamberlain, you watch for a pointed bank, and there's Wolf Creek and Crow Creek. And that's where they were, in a sense, just dumped, you know. And that reminds me of the World War II, when the Japanese were relocated. They lost their homes, their businesses, and so on. But the thing is, at least the Japanese had barracks and good kitchen facilities, where my people didn't have nothing. They were just dumped out there. And it's surprising. It was different. There was times were difficult then. And it's surprising how my people survived. They couldn't go and hunt because the army wouldn't let them leave the reservation. And I want to refer to a book by John P. Williamson. The book is titled The Brothers to the Sioux. It's out of publication, you'll probably find it in the library. And I think it's chapter 4 tells you about this whole incident of how my people were brought to Fort Thompson. Now, to make a long story short, I think I contend, and I have proven so far, that I am a descendant of that group that was brought there as prisoners of war. And my father and his brother, when they were about 18 years old, they were I don't know if it was recruited. They were selected to be sent back to school out east to Hampton, Virginia, and Carlisle, Pennsylvania. But before they could go, they told my father that you've got to change your name. You're going among white people, and you have to change your name. My father's name was Tashokahinto, his gray horses, and my grandfather's name was Sinkpei. Sinkpei is a muskrat because he was a hunter, and Bowedhead, Pau Kudye. Well, after a lot of discussion, they finally agreed to change their name. So they came to the Indian agent at Fort Thompson, and they walked in and said, all right, we'll change your name. So then the agent said, what do you want? And then he threw out different names, and they couldn't agree to anything. So after a little time while they were sitting there, who should walk into the door but Dr. Edward Ashley, one of the first Episcopal missionaries to South Dakota. And when he was told of the situation, he said, "I'll solve that. I'll give you my name." And that's where we get our name. And if you look at my brothers and sisters, our names have a kind of an English connotation, you know. My oldest brother's name was Richard, Lacey, Victoria, Aaron, Lorne, and Vernon. You know, so you hardly hear those names anymore. And but as I say, life wasn't easy on the reservation. Even when I was growing up, it was difficult. It was hard. And I said and I had one pair of shoes. And when I started wearing out, and those were leather soles at that time. You can't find a leather sole shoe today. So when they wore out, we either put a cardboard or something in the sole to cover up the heels. So it was really hard and difficult. And the thing is, there were when I was born, you know, I tried to get a birth certificate, and the vital statistics said, "What town were you born in?" I said, "There was no town." "What hospital?" I said, "There was no hospital." "Was there a clinic?" "No, there was no clinic." You know, it was. So where were you born? In the Buffalo County. It was out on the reservation, you know. So it was a difficult task for me to get a birth certificate. So what I've got is a delayed birth certificate. And and even going to school, there was no.
So whenever you're ready.
Go ahead. Just do your introduction again, and then we'll pick up where you left off with the school.
My name is Vernon Ashley. I was born probably in the coldest winter on record in 1916, January 15, 1916. I'll be 92 years old. And I have a lot of history on the Kakiokute, the Crow Creek Reservation. Now, where I left off was the difficulty was on the reservation. Well, I mean, getting the birth certificate and everything else. Well, I finally got that done, so now I got a birth certificate, a delayed birth certificate from the state of South Dakota. I had to do this because I wanted to get a passport to go overseas. Now, as I said, when the life on the reservation, the schools were little schoolhouses, like a little red schoolhouse. And my schoolhouse called was Pleasant View. And one teacher who taught all grades. And I have the greatest respect for one teacher, and I think she's buried at Christ Church at Fort Thompson, Kate Peterson. She was a wonderful lady. And she saw a lot of potential in me, you know, and she said, and in my writing and everything. In those days, we used the Palmer method in writing. So I had good handwriting, and they don't do that today. You see kids, all they do is print, you know. And now, after I finished the grade school, though, then to go to high school, I had to be sent away, you know. So my father got me in at the Flanders Indian School, which is near the Minnesota border, near Pipestone, Minnesota. And I went there from 1931 to 35. And the point I want to make is I never knew what football was. I never knew what basketball was, or baseball. Well, no baseball, but basketball or football. When I went to Flanders, I made the team. You know, I made them all. And at that time, there was no class in basketball. You know, there's only 5 men on the court, so we played all the big schools in the state. and did a pretty good job of it too. But the thing that I put on my silver belly gray hat is symbolic to me because when my father took me to Flandreau, the thing he bought me was a gray hat. And to me, that just is symbolic because that was the first time I left the reservation. And sure, I was homesick. So what I'd do is go to the west end of the dormitory and sit on the window and look west. Never cry or anything, just sit and think about home, you know. Now after Flandreau in 35, that was at the time when the dirty 30s, the drought. When I came home, I had to work for my father, you know. And I have worked, and I've made this presentation to the State Historical Society. I have worked in all alphabetical programs, whether it's the Work Progress Administration or economic, ECW they call it, economic something. And then the CCCID, the Civilian Conservation Corps Indian Division. And I always tell the kids, I must be tough, because I was just out of high school, and I drove a 4-horse team on a dump wagon. But the thing was, we had to travel to where the dams were to be built. And I camped in a wall tent, and no inner spring matches. I slept on bed, quilts, you know, a couple of quilts and stuff like that. And then for food, I had a lunchbox, a good wood lunchbox. And the thing that really kept me going was sardines. And I think maybe sardines was the best thing I ever did in my life, because historically, sardines have a lot of food value. And maybe that's what gave me this long life. But I always tell about an incident. I wrote this too. The first time I had to hook up my horses on a dump wagon, and the government brought in Letourneau equipment for dirt movers and stuff. So when I hooked them up to the dump wagon, of course that was different than the lumber wagon. So when I brought the horses under the the elevator, and that dirt hit the box, my horses took off. I was just like a rodeo. You know? I hung tough with them, and I brought them back. I had to bring them back underneath that elevator several times for them to get used to it. And I can take you to the dam. I was just east of Fort Thompson. And but you know, those days that pay wasn't much. But I got a lesson for young people today. When my pay came in, I signed the check and gave it to my dad. And my dad is old. I said, "You get us what we need." You know, and I made this presentation to the State Historical Society about 2 years ago, and but things went on, and then of course come the World War II, and the draft took all three of us, my older brother Aaron, and myself, Vernon, and Lorne, my younger one, and took all three. But during that time, I lost my father. So my mother was old, and she was widowed. And I always thought, what did my mother think when the county officials come and got us and loaded us up in the evening and took off? And took us to Washington Springs and boarded the train at night and going across country, didn't know where we were going. I wound up at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Now, that to me was the best experience I've had in my life, is a military service. It was a discipline that did me the good, and it brought me out of my shyness and everything else. And I'll tell you something new that I've never said before. My brothers, we were all put in different branches of the government. My older brother Aaron went into the infantry, it was all Army, and my younger brother Lorne was anti-aircraft, and I was put in the Air Corps. But then when I got in the Air Corps, I went into the medical division. So where I wound up was I was a dental technician. I made all replacements in the mouth. I was a gold expert. I cast crowns, bridges, lingual bars, palatal bars. I did all of that. We would never get a Purple Heart for the service I rendered as a dental technician, but we did a heck of a service for the airmen and airwomen, because I have even identified the wasps who crashed. We identified them by their teeth. That's the only way you can identify a person that's burned is their teeth. And of course that was, but in that, while I was in the service, I played for the Army in football. And that is the dirtiest football I ever played was the Army. And I got banged up, I got rib fractures, and I got a bad knee result. And I remember playing the El Toro Marine Base. I was the only one that played the full game, and I was beat up, mind you, but I was determined I'm going to finish this game, and I did. And then my buddies had to take care of me because I couldn't get up out of bed because of my fractured ribs. It lift and pull me out. So the military was, and then I played baseball for the Air Corps. And so, you know, it wasn't all military life. But you know, when we were going into this Air Corps, we were trained like we were going to be on the battlefront, you know. We had to go through the gas chambers and all of this, and even rifles. And I was a marksman because I grew up using a rifle as a hunter. And so that learning those things was nothing. It was a simple issue. Now, to make a long story short, I was inducted into 1942 and discharged in 1946. The point I want to make, which is important, is that in 1943, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Indian Affairs went before the United States Congress to tell the Congress what the Pick-Sloan plan was going to do to the Missouri River. They were going to harness the Missouri River to stop the flooding and generate power and do and enhance irrigation and so forth. Well, all that time they were telling Congress. They never told the tribe. You know, the tribe never knew about it. But that is 1943. I'm still in the service. So in 1946, when I was discharged, little did I realize what I was getting into when my cousin, Mrs. Mary Santee, said, "Cousin, would you agree to be a tribal leader?" I said, "Sure." So a few weeks later, she saw me in the streets. Well, cousin, you're in. In what? As a tribal leader. But the things that I encountered first was the taking of the thousands of acres of Indian land on the Crow Creek, the Fort Randall Dam. It was going to take thousands of acres of Indian lands, and it was going to remove hundreds of homes of Indian families. You know, and then it was going to take out all our timbered area. You know, where I was born, as I say, below that pointed bank, there was an island there. All that was it was a big timbered area, and it was called Delorious Island, I think. And that's where the government put the lumber mill up and everything else. But those were going to be flooded. So So my problem as a tribal leader, and I got to be I guess I got to be the leader of the council. And so the first thing we had to do was we had to go before Congress to get a lawyer. And you know, that was difficult. I found out that the Bureau of Indian Affairs was not working for the Indian people. And the first person that we took with us was an Indian lawyer by the name of Ramon Rubidoux, and I think he's still living in Rapid City. So we took him with us, and then he had a colleague in Washington named Jim Curry. But Jim Curry, I guess, had some run-in with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, so the Bureau of Indian Affairs wouldn't approve with him. So we had to come back. So then my next move was to get a lawyer that is prominent in South Dakota. And so that I hired the former governor of South Dakota, M.Q. Sharp. M.Q. Sharp was a former reviser of statutes for the state. He was one of the best lawyers that South Dakota ever produced. And he was my lawyer. And of course I had a good memory on lands taking and everything else. So M.Q. Sharp, before we went to Congress, he'd say, "Vernon, when you get stumped, you call on me, and I'll step in." But you know, the things that we had to consider in the loss to the people was not just the land and the homes; it was the intangible damages. The intangible damages, like the shade of the tree we're sitting in, wild fruit like plums, cherries, choke cherries, buffalo berries, and all of those things. Those are intangible damages, and the shade of the tree as well. And so when I went before Congress, you can check with the Congress, and my testimony then is probably in 49, 50, 51, 52. We went before Congress. Now the thing was, we went the first negotiations. We had the MRBI. The MRBI is the Missouri River Basin Investigation Staff, who did a timber count and did a socioeconomic study on all the reservations. And I've got all those studies, and I put them in here at the State Historical Society. So if anybody wants to do research, they can go there and they can do that. But using those things, if I was smart enough, we didn't agree with the MRBI estimates for the land value. We didn't agree with the government. We thought we were losing something forever, so we wanted more for our lands. So that took some doing in Washington. So when we got into Washington, and my friends in Congress were E.Y. Berry and Senator Carl Munt. Some of you know Senator Carl Munt. And they were friends. They were really, it's not like today. Those guys were just personally friends. And I remember one incident in E.Y. Berry's office when we were in there, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, when we wouldn't agree with the estimates that are presented to us. And I always had a counsel with me, but I was their first negotiator. So when I wouldn't agree, the Bureau lawyer said, "Well, let's just leave Crow Creek out. We'll take their land by authority of eminent domain." So that really made me mad. I said, "The hell you will." And I started to get up, and the little lawyer, he's taking off, and E.Y. Berry said, no, it'll never be. But you know, even then, if we had known better, I would have compared, what are you giving the farmer and the rancher that's in the taking area? Come to find out, the farmer and the rancher got a lot better price than we did for our lands. But that's history. And now the Congress is trying to compensate us for those differences in value. And but that then the next thing I had to do was, the tribe didn't have a constitution and bylaws. Now, the Act of June 18, 1934, the Wheeler-Howard Act, or the New Deal, authorized the tribes to form governments. But the Crow Creek did not accept the Wheeler-Howard Act. So the Crow Creek is a treaty tribe. And but let's see, that'll be the Wheeler-Howard Act is in 1934, and so by 48, 15 years later, we had to go to Congress to go, not to Congress, but to the Department of Interior to get administrative authority to form a government for the Crow Creek Reservation. So if you look in the Crow Creek Reservation, you'll see my name as a tribal chairman, and that was approved in 1949. And that is the constitution and bylaws of the tribe. And but those are the big problems I encountered, and I think, that I must have had, the Army must have taught me something, because for me to be doing these important business with the tribe. Now, during this time, though, the Bureau of Indian Affairs administrative officer, Mr. Miner, he called me in, and I guess he saw potential in me, and he said, "Vernon, you're going to be losing your GI benefits." And so he said, "I suggest that you go to college." And well, I'm not no child yet then, I'm in my 30s, mid-30s. And so what I said, well, by that time my mother had died, and I was alone, so I said, I got to sell my stock. So we'll help you arrange that. We'll we take everything else. So they did. And so I sold all my stock and everything else, paid off all the debts, and then I bought me a little Chevrolet. And the car that I bought is right over here, my neighbor. He's remaking it.
Really?
It's a 50 Chevy. And it's a kind of a green, Boy, I thought I was right uptown, and I drove that in there. And of course, at that time, that was a pretty nice car. And so I entered Dakota Wesleyan, and let's see, that'd be January. I entered mid-year. I can't remember now, 31, yeah. And I went to Dakota Wesleyan 3 years. I went summers and all. And then when I graduated, in fact, you'll see if you research in Minneapolis, the Minneapolis covered the story as the chief graduates from college. I had a war bonnet on and the gown and everything else. And in Minneapolis, they covered that story. And, the students never made me think I was an Indian. I really was. Dakota Wesleyan was a great place. And George McGovern was one of my professors. And I forget his Indian law anyway. So the students, when I was in there, he was talking about law on the reservations, and he's talking about right-of-ways, He said, if we want to make a road, he said, if it's a section line, we will just go through there and make the road. So I got his attention. I said, sir, I disagree with you. I said, you cannot do that on the reservation. The state law ends on the reservation line. And the students were all listening when we were talking about it. So I think I gave George McGovern a starting of studying other sections of law. But that prepared me for some of the best things in my life. After, now in 54, the other thing that came up was the Fort Randall Dam, was going to flood the agency, Fort Thompson. It was going to take hundreds of homes, and so we had to prepare for all of this. And but when the agency had to move, the thing was, what I want to tell you is during my time as a rancher, I met my wife, Rose Marie Flynn. She came with the Bureau from Aberdeen as a IIM clerk, individual Indian monies clerk. She exchanged job with a guy who didn't like Fort Thompson, so they changed. Excuse me. That was, meeting my wife was a complete change in my lifestyle, because before I was single, you know, and the reason is the loss of my mother. My mother was the biggest loss in my life, because I think she was the best lady that ever walked the face of the earth. And when I met my wife, she kind of stabilized me. And from there on, we had a good life. And now the agency moved. I want to get back to that. One day, here the truck came in and started loading all the stuff out of. Well, first I want to get back. I'm getting ahead of myself. We had to decide where we wanted to move the agency. So the first choice, of course, the Indian people wanted Chamberlain. So I said, okay. So we invited the city council for Chamberlain up to Fort Thompson, and we talked about what, and when you think about it, there's millions of dollars goes into these agencies. The leasing of land, the money for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, money for the health service, money for the school. You know, it amounted to millions of dollars. So when I presented this to the city council, they said, I wished we could get you to come to the city council. I said, sure, I'd be glad to. So like a goof, I went down to Chamberlain at the city hall, and I made my presentation and explained all of the monies that comes in there. And if we come here, a lot of these monies were spent right here in Chamberlain. And the mayor's name was Herschel Melcher. He was an attorney. He was a mayor. He sat up there, kind of a smile on his face, looking at me as I was making my presentation. And he got up and he said, if you want these stinking Indians in Chamberlain, he said, we're going to put them by you. And he pointed out to the merchants that was with me, you know. We'll put them by you and put them by you and you. So then, right then and there, I thought, no, this is no place for us. So then we contacted Pierre, and Pierre's the Chamber of Commerce, they came, man, they just welcomed us. They would guarantee us housing for our employees and all of that stuff they would do. And they came down to Fort Thompson, brought food. We had really a big meeting with Pierre. And so then, and of course we couldn't turn them down, because how could you turn down such a good presentation? So then the move was to Pierre. The difficult thing was, and it made it difficult for our Indian people, because to do business you had to go 70, 80 miles up to Pierre to do their business. But we did pretty well. And now in this time, of course, I was, after 8 years, just think I was 8 years as a tribal leader. And it took me all this time to get all these things squared in. And I've got a lot of copies of what are the things I'm talking about. As far as land taking, land values, and all of these, I got these. And so then we were going to make a change, and so then from the agency, then I was Oh, I want to make a point here. When we moved to Fort Thompson, CBS called and said we'd like to make a film on the land taking on the Crow Creek Reservation. And that program was for CBS was Eric Severite. Eric Severite was a North Dakotan, and he had the program called The American Week. And so I said, sure, why don't you have just like we are here today. The television crew from New York came and they did a complete story. Now the key to the whole operation was that film, I think. Congress used that film. And my Tahanshi, the Tahanshi means cousin, Bill Voice, was the key speaker. And he did a beautiful job. He says, one time, and he said, at one time, all of this land was ours, you know. And he went on and talked, and then we took pictures of the timber and the hunting and fishing. That film will show you we even got fish in the waters, and I'm the hunter in that film. And of course I had my rifle and everything, but I didn't shoot it. I just shot at a tree just to hear the firing. And but we were never able, and that's what we were never able to get that film. And I think I gave you copies of my letter to Eric Severite. I had the senators working on it, Senator Larry Pressler. But we could never get that film because I would like to show it when my Tahanshi was alive, and some of those people who were involved in that taking. Because the moving of our Indian people was a fantastic job. And it had to move those houses out of there, and that film will show you that mover was from Chamberlain. And I can't remember his name, but he moved those houses out of there, and it just disrupted the way of life completely. And I don't think we ever recovered. Now, and I'm sure my friend Buddy Flory will tell you about what it was like at Fort Thompson. Fort Thompson was a nice place. It was just as good as any city. Now, the reason why the Bureau of Indian Affairs employees all lived there, that was home to them. So they had lawns, it just, really nice. And their kids were in the same school as this other. In fact, some of those kids spoke Dakota as good as I did, They just grew up speaking the language, and there's a lot of benefits. But we lost all of that, and we have never recovered since. Now, getting back to after the move and after this filming and everything else, then I had a family. I had some children, so I had to get someplace to get a little better money because the tribal pay was so small, Shucks, I think we only got $80, for, that wouldn't feed a family. So I said, I've got to do something else. So there was an opening came up at Standing Rock, on a Standing Rock Indian Reservation. So I applied. So my family and I, we drove up to Standing Rock Agency. As we left McLaughlin, and then you go towards Fort Yates, there's nothing, And my wife said, don't talk too good, they might hire you, she said. So when I got in there and talked to J.W. Wellington, when I got done, we got the interviews. When can you report? He said, well, I got to go back and talk to my family, But we made the move. And it was good. Now, I'm asked to appear on TV and radio up at Standing Rock. I've done a lot of good things on the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. First place, they were considering all of their damages, from the building of the Hawaii Dam, the same way with the Fort Randall. So they had to write up all of their tribal programs of how you're going to spend their money. So Ben Rifle was the area director, and Harold Shunk was the superintendent, and they convinced me. They said, Vern, I wish you could write those programs. Well, okay. So then they made me assistant superintendent. I moved to McLaughlin, and I wrote most of the rehabilitation program. And of course, some of those things I really didn't agree in, but I had to put something on paper, and I think I did a pretty good job. And especially the family plan program, that money went to individuals. And what we did was to use the majority of that money to improve their homes. And you know, that was the key to it. They agreed, the Indian people, all right, that's the way it'll be, you know. So we did those things. And I can remember in Wakpala, I can't remember the name, but this one family was going to get, you know, pretty good sum for their loss. And when I went there, they lived in a kind of a dugout in the log house. Part of it was in the dirt, and then the logs. And when I went there, the bad gal, the wife was just like a mad dog, you know. She'd just snap at you and everything else. And so, but in the process, I helped them build a nice house and everything else. And the next time I came there, that lady invited me in for a cup of coffee and some cookies. You know, complete change. What it did for those people. Now, one of the things, well, there were several things I did on Standing Rock. I got into Boy Scouting. Now, KFYR television of Bismarck filmed this. We had the first Boy Scout Jamboree on an Indian reservation. There was 21 counties, and the Missouri Valley Council in North Dakota was involved. And then we had that Boy Scout Jamboree on Fort Yates. And one incident was at the opening day, the scouts were in their little hutments all over in the trees, you know, and then the police force was really helpful to me in a lot of the things. They rode bareback. They come riding in there, shooting the guns, you know, like a raid. Those little scouts were making breakfast. They just dove into their hutments, you know. And I always remember that. They really enjoyed it when they knew it was just nothing that serious. That was one of the things that my son's in scouting in Albuquerque. He just finished a camp out there. And they were trying to get that film, but I don't know if they ever got the film. Because that was back in the 60s, you know. So I guess it's pretty hard to retrieve some of these things. The other thing is, I wrote a story, and I don't know if I gave you a copy, because we put on a pageant of Indian life on the Standing Rock. Yeah. And the narrator was supposed to be Johnny Gates, and but when the time came to put on the program, I can't remember when that was. It was in the winter months. It turns out I had to be the narrator. So you'll see the picture of me in the full Indian costume and narrating what life was like. We had ladies who sang like the famous Indian songs like Pale Moon and the Indian Love Call and stuff like that. And then we had one lady who was the wife of the chief of the police. She did the sign language in the Lord's Prayer. And I'm telling you, we didn't have room for people. A lot of people had to be turned away to watch that. So I wrote this up, and maybe you got a copy. But those are some of the things I did there. And the other thing I think that was important that I did on Standing Rock was to pursue the paper pulping plant. South Dakota State University did a study on the pulping of paper using straw. You know, straw is something that comes up every year, and the farmer don't know what to do. A lot of it, some burn it, but what that plant would do would be to hire 500 people and establish another community altogether, and it create a sale for all the straw that the farmers would have. Now that we did. And I took the Cheyenne River and Standing Rock delegation to Peoria, Illinois, where there was a straw pulping plant there. And then we were going to produce pasteboard box material using straw, and then eventually get into good paper. But that was one of the projects we had on there. But then, that was in '65. I got a call from the governor of South Dakota. And he said, I'd like to interview you for a job with South Dakota. So I agreed. So I came down and had our interview. So there again, the governor says, when can you report? I said, well, I'll have to talk to my family. So we had to go back and talk to the kids. And the kids were all involved. Let's go, So then we moved from Fort Yates to Pierre. And that was one of the best things. And one of the first things we did as the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in South Dakota was to pursue this straw pulping plant. Governor Nils Woe was my first governor. Nils Woe to me was an ideal person for a governor. He had that dignity, he had that presentation, he was really something. And so when we went into Washington delegation, we went with Frank Duchesneau of Cheyenne River, and Dan Quilt and all of them, Dan Howard of Standing Rock, and then Louis Thief and all those guys. We went into to Washington to try to procure money for this big industry. And to come to find out what beat us was the paper lobby. Paper lobbying body was against it, you see. But you see, the whole thing is that we would have staved on the wood. Now Montana has over harvested wood, I understand. And we're going into Canada to get the wood for paper. But anyway, that was one of the things that the governor was so upset to think that the Congress would to do this. And but then at the same time, while I was the commissioner's job, we established a tribal councils training program for the reservations, because we figured that all of the councils, and which I think was right, a lot of the new councilmen never seen their own constitution and bylaws. And so when we devised this training program, we reproduced all their constitution and bylaws, and as a first time, each councilman saw their constitution and bylaws, And so they asked, how soon can we have this? Well, it takes money to do those things, because we had to pay the councilman for coming in and doing things like that. These are some of the things that I've done as a commissioner. And then the best thing we did was we had the best relationship with all the reservations in South Dakota. You never know when, any day you'll see tribal leaders in the Capitol building come to see the governor or some other department of the state. And so it was a time when I thought that we had a good relationship. We had a good Commission of Indian Affairs. Now this Commission of Indian Affairs was made up of prominent Indian and non-Indian leaders. And they weren't tribal leaders. They could be guys who Bishop, oh God, I can't remember his name now. One of the Episcopal bishops was the presiding chairman, And then we had prominent people come on there. So it was a good way of saying, airing the problems of the reservations. How can the state improve on these things? And at that time, we established a scholarship for our Indian students to go to any state university in South Dakota, and they would get this scholarship. And so I think a lot of these things, now we don't even have that scholarship, you know. A lot of the things, they just seem to fade away. After I left there, the fellows who came follow me and must not have followed up on these things, so they just disappeared.
Where would you like, what would you like to see now? Not just for Crow Creek, but for all of the reservations here in South Dakota.
Well, but after that, then I went into, after I was going to leave, I worked with 3 governors in South Dakota, Nils Boe, Frank Farrar, and Dick Knipe. But I'm a Republican, so Dick Knipe was a Democrat, so he eased me out of that job. But then I applied for this federal agency for volunteer service in Denver. But Senator Carl Munn said, no, I don't want you to leave South Dakota. I want you to stay in South Dakota. And so that's how he got me the State Director of Action, the volunteers. It's a federal agency for volunteer service. And one of the things I've been trying to highlight lately, my first job as in that action program was the flood of Rapid City. That was talking about getting your feet wet. So I went out and I worked with the mayor, Don Barnett, and we rented a big home. It's probably a double-story, 4-bedroom home. It's where the federal building is, right on that corner. And I brought in VISTA volunteers in service to America from 8 states to come in and help to find the dead bodies and stuff like that. Now the people of Rapid City lost everything. The flood just took their homes and lives and stuff like that. So the thing that they needed was stuff that they would need in their homes. There's an air base in the Bay Area volunteered to gather a lot of this stuff. And they did, and he did a beautiful job. And the Air Force brought in just those big air transports into the Ellsworth Air Force Base. And then, of course, the governor got the National Guard to help. And those National Guard trucks, we took up a whole school. I think it's a Stevens High School. And that is the distribution point for all the stuff that the people in the flood area would need. And those VISTA volunteers should be commended. They waded in the mud and mire to search for dead bodies. And it was just fantastic, the job they did. Beside that, the Hutterites came in, offered their services free. And then we had RSVP to help distribute the stuff at the school. And that was under the governor's program. And it was really, that was under the action program. Now, after, let's see, that'd be, I was in the governor's office from 55 to 65, 65 to 72. 72 was the flood of Rapid City. 14 years afterward, I retired. And so of course the boys, you know how they are. They had to, they're active and everything else. So we had to move out of town. So I think it was in 1972 we bought this place. And we only paid $27,000 for the whole work, 10 acres. And now I'm told this place is worth close to $250,000.
Oh, I'm sure at least.
And my friend said it's worth more than that.
Oh, it's worth more than that.
And so,
Howard,
we've been here all these years, And now my wife and I made this place. And I want to show you a little pamphlet I put together. When we moved out here, there was nothing. No trees, none of these odd buildings. And the tallest thing on the place was that flagpole you see over there. And now you can't even put a flag there, you know, because of the pine trees.
You've done a beautiful job here, Vern. Beautiful
so
job.
What I wanted to do is to put a rock on the corner and call it the Ashley Tiwaihe Oyanke. That would mean the Ashley family dwelling. I wanted to put but I understand that rock that they'll produce that sign is kind of expensive, so I'm kind of holding off on that. But generally speaking, I think that I've come a long ways from when we restarted talking about my ancestors in Fort Snelling and the difficult conditions under Crow Creek and the difficulties in getting education too. You know, I think I've come a long ways. I think I've set an example for young people today. Now, what I profess is that education is the key to the problems of our Dakota people. And my children exemplify what I've professed. I've got my oldest son is the head of one of the heads of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Phoenix, Arizona, John Ashley. And then I got a son that's an architect that lives in Albuquerque, and his wife is a doctor. And so they own 2 homes, you know. And then I got a son at Lincoln, Nebraska. He's ready to retire. Now, the thing that I want to tell the Indian people, they can, with education, they can attain a lifestyle just like any other American. My children vacation, I think they just returned from Mexico. They go into Mexico and they go to vacation in Hawaii. My son vacations in different parts of the country. He was down there at Saskatchewan. Not Saskatchewan. Well, they went down to Jacksonville, and then they ate at that Paula Dean's restaurant, you know, and you know, these things are possible, you know, just like any other American, to have a lifestyle of this way. You do that through education. And I think that I like to set up examples of any student who finishes there was a young lady that finished her doctor's degree in University of Arizona. And I can't remember her name, but she got her doctor's degree this past spring. And the big companies were after her, you know, to hire her and everything else. And she's from Pine Ridge. But that just shows you that if you get the education, you can do these things. And so that's where we're at. And I hope I've done a job for you. And
if you'd like to take a little break, I'd like to take you back to the dam a little bit more, but take a little break right now. Some of the things that happened back during that time that you were negotiating.
Oh, yeah.
So let's just take a little break right now.
Okay.
Now we want to go back to...
Yeah, let's go back to when you got back from World War II.
Okay. I'm recording, so whenever you're ready.
Started out there, World War II, you came back, they made you the tribal, you fell into that position, and that was the preliminary negotiations for the dam. And what was going on? What was the promises that were made to you and the people of Crow Creek, and evolved up to when the dam, and the sadness of that whole part. While you're talking about this, we're going to go back and get some of that filming, some of the teepees that are there right now this weekend, and film some of that. So you can talk about the teepees or the way it was that you remember. You came back, the early days, the progressiveness of that whole area, and how that's taken you down and to the point where Crow Creek really hasn't recovered.
Okay.
So
Okay,
go
I'm
ahead.
recording, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, this is Vernon Ashley. We're going back to a time when the Pick Sloan plan was taking thousands of acres of the Crow Creek reservation. As I said before, it was my job as a tribal leader to try to get just compensation for the tribe and its people. And you must remember, the MRBI made a socioeconomic study of this taking area. And they did a timber count. They did, I don't know how they did it, but they had in their socioeconomic studies I have, and they're in the state library or state historical society, is the other losses that the tribe would lose. But the main purpose, of course, was to try to protect our people on the reservation and try to get a just compensation for their losses. And so it took a lot of negotiations with Congress, and if a little research, you probably could get all those details that we went into. The timber count was the big one, because as I referred to it years later, that skeleton forest, I called it, with all the dead trees standing in the water, you know. But now they're all falling over and drifting and so forth. But the Fort Randall Dam, now that alone was devastating to the tribe, because it lost the Bureau of Indian Affairs facilities. And those facilities were, as I remember them, they were, as I say, it was a community in itself, because the Bureau employees lived there, and they maintained the homes and everything else. And we had a good school system. My oldest sister worked in a dormitory, and a lot of my nieces and nephews graduated from high school right there. But when we lost the facilities, that was a devastating blow to the tribe. Now we haven't, and as my son will vouch for it, the school has never been rebuilt, and the hospital's never been rebuilt. We got a clinic, of course. Our police force, I understand, and they need something. A lot of these facilities just dropped off, and at a time when there's so many problems on the reservation, or any community really, drugs, alcohol, and I think it's a time when the government needs to take another look at our facilities and try to help. And that's what I'm telling the new councilman, Mr. Thompson, Lester Thompson. I had a court case called Ashley et al. Plaintiff versus the United States Department of Interior. Well, that case, I've got documentation almost two inches thick to substantiate the law case. We went before the court in Aberdeen, and it was dismissed. And then we appealed to St. Louis, and it was dismissed for the simple reason that they said I didn't have stature. And I told a lawyer, I said, my golly, if I don't have stature, nobody does, you know. I said, just think, I lost land in the taken area. And I said, and of all the other things I've did in the Crow Creek, I said, my gosh, I think I established some stature. But that's a court for you. So now I understand the Crow Creek tribe is going to take up that case. And if they do, they'll get out of that $40 million debt. and maybe we can establish a good school system. Because I think that Crow Creek could be better. The MRBI they said a socioeconomic study said we have almost 5,000 acres of arable and farm and irrigable lands, and I have these plans to show exactly what could be raised on a Crow Creek, and those lands, they said they will raise anything. You just put the water on it, and so the potential is there, and it will create jobs. Certainly, they need jobs. You know, irrigation will work. We know it will, because we involved the Brigham Young University to come out on the Crow Creek, and they did a model farm of irrigation, and that little farm produced corn and all other vegetables for the farm use, and. But of course, the Brigham Young and his staff kept it up. So the fellow who followed me as a tribal chairman, he said, "Why shucks, we can do that. We'll take that over." So the tribe took it over and had the Brigham Young leave. It all fell flat on his face, you know.
So Brigham Young and the Mormons were in there during your administration. That's kind of interesting, being these guys are Mormons.
So so we know the potential is there, and we could raise stock feed. In fact, when I was in the governor's office, I said the tribe should use the facilities of our state universities, the Agricultural College at Brookings, the University of South Dakota, or even our teachers' institutes. We could use those, and the governor said we certainly can. They just ask and we'll do it, you know. So I had the support of the governor, but of course the tribal leaders at the time didn't see it that way, so it never was accomplished. But these things are all possible, you know, and there's no need. As I said, education is a solution, and if we could get an administration that gives priority to education on the reservation, require that the kids stay in school. There was a time, and I'm going to refer to the fellow, you know, Don Loudner, him and his brother, Edgar, and let's see if I can remember, Eddie Shields and his brothers. At that time, I don't forget what year that was, they were in high school. They were an outstanding basketball team in South Dakota. Eddie Shields was called the Marcus Haynes of the reservation.
Wow.
That guy could dribble. In a corn patch, he dribbled for I forget how many minutes. He was just dribbling around the team. They couldn't get the ball away from him. And so it's possible, you see, to do this. And but I don't know what it'll take to inspire our parents. Now the young people, now that population down there is pretty young. And I would think if there was somebody would just get inspired, they could push education to the best that you can have in the country. And get a good school system and everything else. It's got to work. And have a good government. And have a community that's an example in South Dakota. That could be done. That could be done in the Crow Creek. And I want to tell the people on the Crow Creek that it's up to them. They've got to decide, where do we want to go from here? You know, in some of my writing, I said I'm reminded of an old song. My memories, you know, I said, I can't remember the words right now, but then with that song means, you know, if we could just continue, we would improve our lives.
I'm What you remember at that time, you actually worked in the hospital down there, and were some of those stories of what was it like down in there? It was fairly.
Well, that is before the war.
Yeah.
Before the war,
Talk
I
about
worked in the hospital, and I was I was a jack of all trades in the hospital. I run the furnace stand, you know, and then I was a janitor. I even assisted in operation. But then I was an ambulance driver. But one of the things that I remember so vividly, old man Grassrope died at Lower Brule Reservation. Well, in order to get to Lower Brule, you had to go through Chamberlain and on to Reliance and then back up to Lower Brule. So I thought that the night person would do that. The day person would do that, or to move his body to Lower Brule. And the guys didn't want to do it. They waited until I came on in the evening to move that body. So I said, okay, we'll do it. And so we moved that body, and then at that time the hospital wasn't built to bring any, and the morgue was downstairs to bring that body out of there. So we brought that body out of there, put it in a hearse, and so then I was all alone. You know, I couldn't even get one of my relatives right along. So as I was going west out of Chamberlain, I could just feel chills running up my back. I had to look around. You know, that was the spookiest thing I ever did. And I delivered the body over to Lower Brule, came back, and it was really a time when that community was real good. I remember taking care of an old man, George Shields, and he's the grandfather of the Shields that are on the reservation. He was a good man. He was a good man, a bronc rider and everything else. But in his later life, he just couldn't help himself. So then when I come in, I'd have to lift him to move him around and do all of those things. But it was a time when I remember doing things that are for the good of people, you know. And but those things are gone. And the song goes, I live in memories among my souvenirs. Some letters tied in blue, a lithograph or two, a rose from you among my souvenirs. Do you remember that? That reminds me of the song that where I'm sitting today that's what I'm remembering. These things, it can be done, you know, with education and the determination and desire to do something better.
Well, we're going to try to take your words and do what we can in Minnesota there to try to help, you know, spearhead this to get it to some others who can help, and maybe together it can be done.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Could I have copies of this?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe a couple of copies, you know, from my children to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because my son in Albuquerque wants to use this even for scouting, you know.
Sure.
And
yeah, we will try to carry on what he's saying is improve the education.